I have a double shot oat flat white for Julian and Alara. The barista's voice cut through the low, ambient hum of the Spy House coffee on Nicollet Avenue. It was a Tuesday morning in late November, the kind of bitterly cold Minnesota day where the sky hangs low and heavy like a slate gray bruised ceiling, and the biting wind off the Mississippi River forces everyone to bury their faces deep into woolen scarves. Inside the coffee shop, the air was thick, humid, and intensely aromatic. It smelled of freshly roasted espresso beans, burnt milk, melting butter from the pastry case, and the damp, melting snow dripping off the heavy boots of the morning commuters. The hiss of the steam wand and the rhythmic, hollow thud of the espresso portafilter being knocked against the trash bin created a steady, chaotic symphony. I was sitting exactly 3 tables away from the pickup counter, tucked into a small corner booth near the frosted front window. I was 31 years old. I was wearing my husband's oversized gray wool sweater, the expensive Scottish cashmere one that swallowed my frame entirely. It smelled faintly of cedar wood and his signature bergamot cologne, a scent that usually brought me a profound sense of comfort. I was nursing a lukewarm chamomile tea in a generic paper cup that had cost me exactly $4.83. The heat had long since sapped from the liquid, leaving the cardboard sleeve feeling damp and useless beneath my fingertips. The tea itself was steeped too long. It tasted sharply bitter, coating the back of my throat with an earthy medicinal film. My husband, Julian, had left our downtown apartment exactly 45 minutes prior. The memory of his departure was still fresh, playing on a loop in my mind. I remembered the heavy, solid sound of his leather Oxford shoes echoing against our hardwood floors. I remembered the precise metallic click of his brass briefcase clasp snapping shut. He had walked over to where I was sitting at the kitchen island, leaned down, and kissed my forehead. His lips had been warm, his jaw freshly shaved and smooth. "I have an emergency client crisis in St. Paul that's going to take all morning," he had said, his voice laced with an entirely convincing layer of manufactured stress. "In St. Paul?" I had asked, looking up from my laptop. "On a Tuesday morning? The traffic over the bridge is going to be a nightmare." "I know. It's a disaster," he sighed, running a hand through his perfectly styled dark hair. "The zoning board is threatening to pull the commercial permits on the new warehouse renovation. If I don't get in front of the city planners by 8, we lose a month of construction time." "Do you want me to pack you a thermos?" I had offered, already half standing. "I can make a quick pour over." "No, don't worry about it," he said, checking his gold wristwatch with a frantic energy. "I don't even have time to make coffee at home. I'll just grab something from the vending machine at the municipal building. I love you. See you tonight?" "Drive safe," I had replied. "The roads are slick." "Always do, Lynn. Wish me luck." But there he was, standing 20 feet away from me. He wasn't in St. Paul. He wasn't sitting in a sterile municipal building arguing with city planners. He was standing at the pickup counter of the Spy House coffee, bathed in the warm amber glow of the Edison bulbs dangling from the exposed industrial ceiling, and he was wrapping his right arm tightly, possessively, around the waist of a blonde woman in a stunning camel-colored trench coat. The coat was a thick cashmere blend, impeccably tailored, cinched at the waist to accentuate her figure. Her blonde hair fell in perfect, effortless waves down her back. She leaned her entire body weight into his chest, her face turning upward toward his. She was laughing at something he had just whispered into her ear, a bright, crystalline laugh that somehow pierced straight through the dense wall of ambient cafe noise. She reached out with a manicured hand to grab the 2 steaming cups sitting on the wooden bar. They shared a drink order. They shared a private joke. They shared a physical closeness that was so fluid, so deeply ingrained and practiced, that it sent a violent, icy shockwave straight down my spine. When you experience a profound, world-shattering betrayal, Your body reacts entirely independent of your conscious brain. It doesn't ask for permission. Sitting there in that corner booth, my stomach dropped with the sickening, weightless velocity of a plummeting elevator. My lungs constricted, suddenly unable to draw oxygen from the coffee-scented air. A freezing, clammy sweat instantly broke out across the back of my neck, while the blood rapidly drained from my face, rushing away from my extremities to protect my vital organs. The ambient noise of the cafe, the hissing steam, the chatter, the clinking ceramics, faded into a distant muffled hum, replaced by a high-pitched, deafening ringing in my ears. I didn't stand up. I didn't scream. I didn't throw my cup across the room. I just sat there, utterly frozen in time, my rigid fingers gripping the cardboard sleeve of my lukewarm tea so hard that the muscles in my forearms ached and my knuckles turned a bruised, bloodless shade of white. Exactly 114 days later, I sat directly across from him in a cold, aggressively modern mahogany mediation room in a towering glass high-rise, and I slid a silver iPad across the polished wood table. When the judge hit play on the hidden video I had meticulously recorded, Julian's face went the exact terrifying color of wet, curing concrete. I watched the arrogant, untouchable light die in his eyes in real time. But by then, it was way too late for apologies, excuses, or negotiations. It was way too late. His entire life was already scheduled for total, uncompromising demolition. To understand why I didn't confront him in that coffee shop, why I didn't cause a scene, and why I chose instead to systematically, surgically dismantle every single pillar of his existence, you need to understand how my brain works. My name is Linnea Caldwell. I am 31 years old, and I work as a senior library archivist at the Hennepin County Central Library in downtown Minneapolis. Specifically, I work deep within the Special Collections and Metadata Department, housed in the subterranean levels of the building. If you don't know what that specific title entails, don't worry. Most people don't. People hear the word librarian and they immediately conjure a tired, dusty stereotype. They picture a mousy woman in a moth-eaten cardigan, wearing glasses on a beaded chain, shushing boisterous teenagers and aggressively stamping due dates on the inside covers of battered paperback novels. They think my job is quiet, passive, obsolete, and profoundly boring. They don't realize that an archivist is essentially a forensic historian. My entire career, my entire mental framework is built on the rigorous science of finding things that are lost, hidden, obscured, or intentionally buried by people who thought they were smarter than the historical record. I spend 40 hours a week down in the climate-controlled archives, breathing in the distinct, sweet, vanilla and almond scent of degrading lignin from centuries-old paper. I spend my days bathed in the harsh blue-white glow of dual monitors, cross-referencing handwritten property deeds from the 1800s. I track down the convoluted provenance of contested multi-million-dollar wills. I trace illegitimate bloodlines through obscure, seemingly innocuous tax parcels. I find the microscopic, overlooked digital footprints left behind by desperate people who thought they were clever enough to erase their sins. I don't just read books, I read metadata. To erase their sins. I read the invisible structural connections between seemingly unrelated pieces of scattered information. I've always been wired exactly like this. I was the middle child of four loud, athletic, aggressively outgoing siblings. Our childhood home was a constant, deafening storm of slamming doors, muddy cleats, shouting matches, and blaring televisions. It always smelled of sweaty hockey pads, wet dog, and burnt toast. In a house that relentlessly chaotic, you do not survive by trying to shout louder than the rest of the pack. You survive by fading into the floral wallpaper, controlling your breathing, and watching everything. We weren't poor, but my parents were stretched incredibly thin, constantly sweating over the mortgage and shuffling limited resources to pay for expensive hockey camps, elite dance recitals, and braces. I learned very early on that if I wanted something, a new book, a quiet corner to study, an extra serving at dinner, I had to figure out how to maneuver and get it quietly without triggering any of the household alarms. My grandfather Elias was the only person in the world who really understood me. He was a retired master clockmaker who lived in a small, drafty Victorian house on the edge of the city. His home was a sanctuary of precision and silence. It smelled permanently, beautifully of sweet cherrywood pipe tobacco, sharp peppermint lozenges, and the metallic tang of brass polish. He used to sit at his heavy oak workbench under a bright halo of yellow light, surrounded by hundreds of tiny, intricate, impossibly delicate gears, springs, and pinions. The entire house was alive with the syncopated, overwhelming, yet deeply soothing ticking of 50 different clocks. He would let me sit quietly beside him for hours, giving me the meticulous task of organizing his scattered tools by their exact size, weight, and mechanical function. He was a deeply quiet, solitary man, but when he finally spoke, you stopped breathing and you listened. He gave me a piece of advice when I was 12 years old, right after a neighborhood boy named Tommy had brazenly stolen my new silver bicycle from our front porch and then lied directly to my face about it, even while sporting a fresh scrape on his knee that matched the bike's pedal. I remember Grandfather Elias sitting at his bench, calmly polishing a tiny brass mainspring with a soft chamois cloth, not even looking up at my tear-stained face as he said it. Linnea, his voice was a low, gravelly rumble. A liar only checks the locks on the front door. I didn't fully grasp the immense tactical brilliance of that statement until 2 decades later. I had no idea how much that one simple sentence would eventually save my life, because the fundamental truth about liars, the fatal flaw in their psychology, is that they exhaust all of their paranoid energy fortifying the obvious entry points. They lock their cell phones with complex passcodes. They change their email passwords every month. They meticulously delete their text messages. They clear their browser histories. They stand guard at the heavy oak front door, convinced their fortress is impenetrable. They completely, arrogantly forget about the basement windows. And then I met Julian. Looking back with the cold, sterile clarity of hindsight, the warning signs weren't just red flags fluttering in the breeze. They were an entire deafening parade, complete with a brass marching band, screaming sirens, and blazing pyrotechnics. I just chose to put on heavy noise-canceling headphones, close my eyes, and enjoy the warmth of the show. We met at the Astor Cafe on a rainy, miserable Tuesday afternoon in October. I was there alone, sitting at a wobbly wooden table near the back, deeply engrossed in a dense, heavy biography of a local brutalist architect. The pages were rough and smelled of old ink. Julian had been rushing past my table, distracted by something on his phone, when his hip clipped the edge of my chair. He stumbled, spilling exactly half of his scalding dark roast coffee directly onto the edge of my open book, staining the thick pages a muddy brown. He was mortified, but more dangerously, he was incredibly charming. He was wearing a tailored, double-breasted navy suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. His dark hair was slightly damp from the rain, and he had this disarming, self-deprecating laugh that made him instantly, magnetically likable. "Oh my God, I am so incredibly sorry," he had gasped, grabbing a handful of cheap paper napkins from the dispenser and dabbing uselessly at the ruined pages. "I completely lost my footing. I'm an idiot." It's fine," I said, trying to salvage the binding. "It missed the main text mostly." "I'm Julian," he said, extending a hand that was warm and slightly calloused. "And I am paying for your dry cleaning, the replacement cost of this book, and your next 3 coffees." "I'm Linnea," I replied, tentatively shaking his hand. "And that's really not necessary. It's just a library book. I can pay the damage fee. I absolutely insist, he smiled, and his eyes crinkled at the corners. Please, it's the least I can do after attempting to drown your local history. Let me make it up to you. Just a replacement black tea will do, Julian, I conceded, feeling a strange flush of heat in my cheeks. Deal, he grinned. But I'm upgrading you to a pastry, too. Non-negotiable. He was a commercial real estate developer. He specialized in aggressively buying distressed, forgotten properties, gut renovating them with cheap, modern finishes, and flipping them at a massive premium to wealthy young professionals. He was fiercely ambitious, fast-talking, and constantly vibrating with a restless, kinetic energy. We were total, undeniable opposites. He operated entirely in the fast-paced future, always chasing the next massive deal, the next commission, the next horizon. I operated entirely in the dusty past, quietly cataloging and preserving what had already happened. For the first 2 years of our relationship, we were devastatingly happy. The kind of happy that makes other couples uncomfortable. We used to spend our lazy Sunday afternoons eating greasy, molten cheese Juicy Lucy's at Matt's Bar in South Minneapolis. I can still remember the smell of the fried onions, the slick grease on the cheap paper napkins, the suffocating heat of the small, crowded booth. We would sit there drinking cheap draft beer, laughing at his terrible impressions of his clients until our ribs physically ached. He used to leave bright yellow sticky notes on the fogged-up bathroom mirror for me to find when I woke up. You are the smartest person I know. Can't wait to see you tonight, beautiful. You make this empty house a home. I found out much later, during the darkest days of my investigation, that he bought those specific sticky notes in bulk from an office supply store, and he wasn't just writing those scripted, generic phrases for me. The shift in our marriage didn't happen overnight. It wasn't an explosion. It was insidious. It was a slow, creeping rot in the floorboards. It started about a year after we got married, precisely at the moment his boutique development firm started landing larger, highly lucrative, multi-million-dollar city contracts. The very first symptom of the infection was the phone. We were having an expensive dinner at Spoon and Stable, celebrating our second wedding anniversary. The restaurant was dim and romantic, filled with the ambient clinking of heavy crystal wine glasses and the warm glow of amber lighting. Julian had always been attached to his cell phone. He was in real estate after all, and his income relied on constant communication, but he had always kept the device face up on the table between us. But that night, as the waiter poured our expensive Cabernet, I watched Julian deliberately place his phone face down on the white linen tablecloth. When it violently buzzed against the wood 10 minutes later, he didn't flip it over to check the bright notification screen like he usually did. He just slid his large hand over the back of the phone, his knuckles tensing, his jaw clenching tight. "Everything okay with the properties?" I asked softly, taking a slow sip of my wine, feeling the heavy tannins coat my tongue. "Just a contractor having a meltdown about some delayed drywall," he said smoothly, not meeting my eyes. "Nothing I can't handle. Tonight is about us." "It's vibrating constantly, Julian," I pressed gently. "Are you sure you don't need to answer it? It could be the structural engineer. You said they were inspecting the foundation today." "Linnea, please," he sighed, a sharp edge of irritation suddenly slicing through his charming facade. "Stop micromanaging my business. I said it's fine." "I was just asking," I murmured, taken aback by his tone. "Well, stop asking and enjoy the duck," he snapped, picking up his fork. "Tonight is about us." I told myself it was nothing, just the stress of a big contract, but my archivist brain knew. It wasn't nothing. It was a data point. 2 weeks later, the passcode on his personal iPad changed. We used to share the heavy silver device to stream documentaries and shows in bed on Sunday mornings. The security code had always been the month and year we met at the Astor Cafe, 1015. When I picked it up from the nightstand and tried to log in to watch a new historical series, the screen flashed a harsh red warning. Incorrect passcode. It locked me out. Julian, did you change the iPad password? I called out toward the master bathroom. Oh, yeah, he shouted back, his voice echoing loudly off the cold marble tile over the sound of the running shower. His voice echoing. Company policy. On our shared home iPad? I asked, walking over to the bathroom door. The one we watch Netflix on? My work email is synced to it, Linnea, he said, stepping out of the shower and wrapping a towel around his waist. Water dripped down his chest. We have to use randomized, highly encrypted security codes now because of the sensitive financial data I'm handling for the new investors. I just wanted to watch the Romanov documentary, I said, holding out the locked screen. Use your laptop, he dismissed easily, walking past me to his closet. I'm just trying to secure our future, Lynn. I can't risk a data breach because you wanted to watch a history show. It feels a little extreme, don't you think? I countered, feeling a cold knot form in my stomach. If you actually understood corporate liability, you wouldn't think so, he said condescendingly, not looking back. Then came the sudden, erratic, deeply suspicious generosity. Julian had always been a reasonably good gift giver, but suddenly, out of nowhere, he was bringing home expensive items that felt entirely, bizarrely disconnected from my actual personality. One evening, he handed me a heavy designer shopping bag. Inside was a $400 silk scarf in a loud, aggressive neon leopard print. The fabric felt unnaturally slick and cold against my skin. A week later, it was an expensive, heavy glass bottle of imported perfume. I sprayed it once on my wrist. It smelled intensely of heavy, cloying gardenias and thick amber. It was a suffocating scent that immediately gave me a sharp headache right behind my eyes. He knew for an absolute fact that I only ever wore light, clean, citrus-based scents. It was transparent guilt shopping. He was blindly buying expensive gifts for a generic archetype of a woman, not for the woman he had actually married, and whenever I tried to express even a fraction of my growing unease, he would immediately deploy his favorite, most effective weapon, unease. He had this specific, incredibly condescending tone he used, a way of purposefully lowering the pitch of his voice to make me feel frantic and hysterical, while he remained the calm, rational voice of absolute reason. I don't think this scent really works with my body chemistry, Julian, I had said quietly, rubbing my wrist with a wet washcloth to dull the overwhelming gardenia smell. You're living in the past, Linnea, he sighed heavily, dramatically rubbing his temples as if my mere presence was exhausting him. You spend all day down in a dark basement digging through old, dead history, and you bring that paranoid, suspicious energy home to our marriage. It gives me a migraine, Julian. You know I only wear citrus. I'm trying to help you evolve, he countered, his voice dripping with pity. I'm trying to buy you nice things. You're making a massive mountain out of a molehill. Nobody else on earth would tolerate this kind of constant, ungrateful interrogation over a nice gift. It's not an interrogation, I whispered, my throat tight. I'm just stating a preference. Well, your preference is to be difficult. Just say thank you and wear it, he commanded. He made me feel crazy. He made me feel like my own sharp intuition was a diagnosed mental illness. But the final fracture, the real, undeniable, catastrophic crack in the foundation of my reality, happened precisely at the moment I saw him at that coffee shop with the blonde woman in the camel coat. Sitting there in the Spy House coffee, watching him hand her that oat flat white, watching him place his hand so intimately, so comfortably on the small of her back as he guided her toward the heavy glass exit doors, my entire universe collapsed inward. I watched through the frosted glass window as they walked out into the freezing wind together. They climbed into the warm, leather-scented interior of his black Audi SUV. The taillights flared red, and they drove away into the morning traffic. I didn't run out into the street after them. I didn't scream his name. I didn't throw my lukewarm tea at his tires. I simply reached into the pocket of his oversized gray sweater, pulled out my phone, opened my blank notes app, and typed 2 words with trembling, freezing thumbs: Alara, camel coat. Then I stood up, threw my tea in the trash, and took the bus to work, and the escalation phase of my life officially began. Because what Julian completely failed to understand was that seeing him at the coffee shop didn't break me. It didn't destroy me, it activated me. But as an archivist, I knew better than to act on incomplete metadata. I needed vastly more information. I needed to know the exact horrifying scope of the infection before I sharpened the bone saw and amputated the limb. The next 3 months of my life were a grueling, exhausting masterclass in psychological warfare, primarily because Julian's behavior began to rapidly and violently deteriorate as his arrogant confidence grew. He truly believed he was untouchable. He believed I was blind. The profound disrespect started actively bleeding into our public life. We hosted a formal dinner party at our apartment for a few of his senior real estate partners and their wives. I spent 2 entire days meticulously preparing a complicated, earthy wild rice and mushroom soup, roasting a massive chicken with rosemary and lemon, and polishing our good silver until my hands cramped. The apartment smelled incredible, a warm blend of simmering broth and roasting garlic. During the main course, one of his senior partners, a loud, aggressively red-faced man named Greg, who smelled strongly of cheap bourbon, turned his attention to me. "So, Linnea," Greg boomed over the clinking of silverware, "how are things going down at the library? Still shushing people and stamping due dates?" Before I could even open my mouth to answer, Julian laughed. It wasn't his warm, charming Astor Cafe laugh. Julian laughed. It was a sharp, biting, deeply dismissive sound that echoed unpleasantly off the dining room walls. "Oh, you know, Linnea," Julian sneered, taking a generous, relaxed sip of his expensive Cabernet. "She just sorts the Dewey Decimal System all day, dusts off old maps, reshelves romance novels. It keeps her busy and out of trouble while the adults actually build the city." The entire table went uncomfortably, dead quiet. The wives exchanged nervous, tight-lipped glances. I slowly placed my silver fork down on the linen napkin. I looked directly at Julian. He didn't even have the basic human decency to look back at me. He was completely focused on aggressively cutting his roasted chicken, a smug little smile playing on his lips. "Actually," I said, my voice perfectly level, the pitch perfectly controlled, "I'm currently indexing the unredacted probate records of corrupt city officials from the 1930s. Greg blinked, surprised. "Oh, yes," I continued, staring a hole into the side of Julian's head. "It's highly relevant to current zoning laws. It's truly fascinating how much catastrophic financial fraud you can uncover just by looking at where arrogant people send their mail and who they think they're hiding their assets from." Julian finally looked up, his jaw instantly tightening, his smug smile vanishing. "Well," Julian snapped, his voice hard and cold, "like I said, ancient history." He had the emotional depth and range of a broken parking meter. The financial control phase escalated rapidly just a few weeks after that dinner. Julian sat me down at the cold granite kitchen island on a Sunday morning. The kitchen smelled of his strong, black French press coffee. He slid a complex, highly detailed, color-coded spreadsheet across the smooth stone counter toward me. "I'm consolidating our accounts," he announced, aggressively tapping an expensive gold pen against the paper. "With the new commercial mortgage I'm taking out for the massive North Loop warehouse project, the bank needs to see maximum immediate liquidity in my primary business accounts. I'm moving the bulk of our joint savings over to a new management structure. I stared down at the numbers on the spreadsheet. The total at the bottom was staggering. You're moving our joint savings? I asked, my voice tight. That's our entire emergency fund, Julian. We spent 6 years building that safety net. It's just on paper, Lynn, he sighed heavily, immediately deploying his favorite patronizing phrase. You're making a mountain out of a molehill again. It's just a temporary restructuring. Without discussing it with me first, I challenged. My name is on that account, too. And I'm leveraging it to make us incredibly wealthy, he shot back, his eyes flashing with genuine anger. Let me handle the complex finances. You just focus on your dusty little books. I don't have the time or the crayons to explain commercial liquidity to you. I didn't argue. Arguing with Julian when he was in that state was like trying to nail wet jello to a brick wall. It was pointless and messy. But I stared at the paper just long enough to permanently memorize the 9-digit routing number at the top of the spreadsheet before he snatched it away and shoved it into his briefcase. Then came the physical evidence, the careless, arrogant, sloppy mistakes of a man who firmly believed his wife was functionally blind and intellectually stunted. I was in the garage cleaning out the interior of his black Audi SUV, a domestic chore he usually handled himself, but he had carelessly left the passenger windows rolled down during a torrential rainstorm, and the leather seats smelled like wet dog and mildew. As I wedged the vacuum nozzle deep into the dark, tight crevice between the passenger seat and the center console, my fingers brushed against a small, crumpled piece of thermal paper. I pulled it out into the harsh fluorescent light of the garage. It was a printed receipt from a Sephora store in the Mall of America. It was dated exactly 3 days prior. The transaction was paid entirely in cash, $52.16. The item purchased was a high-end liquid lipstick. The shade name was printed clearly in stark black ink on the receipt, Rebel Red. I don't wear red lipstick. I never have. I wear a sheer tinted cherry lip balm. Elara, however, as I vividly recalled from the agonizing 20 minutes I spent watching her outside the coffee shop, wore a very striking, aggressive shade of deep crimson. My heart hammered against my ribs, a dull, heavy thud. I didn't storm into the house and confront him. I calmly smoothed out the crumpled receipt against the leather seat, took my phone out of my pocket, and snapped a high-resolution, perfectly lit photograph of the metadata. Then I meticulously crumpled the paper back into its exact original shape and wedged it right back into the dark, dusty crevice of the passenger seat where I had found it. But Julian didn't act alone in his daily campaign of cruelty. Every monster has an architect, an enabler who feeds their ego, and Julian had his older sister, Beatrice. Beatrice Caldwell was a senior, high-powered financial planner for a massive cutthroat wealth management firm in the wealthy suburb of Edina. She was sharp-featured, aggressively manicured, and fiercely, toxically protective of her younger brother. She had never liked me. She thought my career lacked ambition. She thought my clothes were cheap. And she made absolutely no secret of the fact that she viewed our marriage as a terrible, depreciating financial investment on Julian's part. The public humiliation reached its absolute, unbearable peak at a late summer family barbecue in Beatrice's sprawling, perfectly landscaped backyard. The air smelled of burning charcoal, expensive coconut sunscreen, and spilled beer. I just added her words to the growing archive in my mind, but the psychological warfare didn't stop there. Julian began to wage a campaign on my physical reality, executing maneuvers designed to make me feel small and insane. It was a Sunday evening in late October. The apartment smelled sharply of chemical perchloroethylene from the dry cleaning plastic. I was standing in the bedroom, quietly sorting Julian's freshly cleaned suits and shirts, preparing his wardrobe for the week. As I pulled the thin, static clinging plastic off his heavy charcoal wool suit jacket, something soft and entirely out of place caught my eye. Tucked deep inside the left sleeve of the jacket, caught on the silk lining, was a piece of fabric. I pulled it out. It was a woman's black lace silk camisole. It was tiny, a size extra small, and as I held it up, the unmistakable, suffocating scent of heavy gardenia perfume radiated from the delicate fabric. Julian was sitting on the edge of the bed, furiously typing an email on his laptop. "Julian," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "what is this?" "What is what? I'm trying to answer an investor, Lynn," he said, not looking up from the glowing screen. "This black lace top. It was inside your dry cleaning bag, tucked inside the sleeve of your charcoal suit." He finally looked up. For a fraction of a second, I saw genuine, raw panic flash behind his eyes. But then the vault door slammed shut, and his features smoothed into a mask of total, irritated boredom. "Oh, for God's sake, Linnea," he groaned, rolling his eyes dramatically. "The dry cleaner obviously mixed up my shirts with someone else's order. They process thousands of garments a day. It happens all the time." "It's a size extra small, Julian," I said, holding the silk out toward him. "And it smells exactly like that heavy gardenia perfume you bought me last month." "Are you seriously sniffing random laundry now?" he barked, slamming his laptop shut. "Seriously sniffing?" "You are literally losing your mind. It's a mistake by the cleaner." "It was shoved inside your jacket sleeve, Julian. It wasn't just hanging on the rack." "Because they cram everything onto the same motorized rack, Linnea. They shove things in plastic bags. Stop being so incredibly paranoid and hysterical. Throw the damn thing away if it bothers you so much, or take it back to the Koreans down the street and complain. I don't have the time or the energy for your insane jealousy right now." He grabbed his laptop, stood up, and stormed out of the bedroom, leaving me alone. I stood there in the quiet room, holding the delicate black silk. It weighed absolutely nothing, but it felt like a heavy iron anvil in my shaking hands. I had watched him lie directly to my face, his heart rate completely steady, his breathing perfectly normal. He didn't even have the decency to sweat. It was the terrifying, sociopathic composure of a man who truly believed his lies were the only reality that mattered. The spatial violation happened just a few weeks later, right before Thanksgiving. I came home from a grueling 10-hour shift at the library archives. My eyes were burning, red and dry from staring at glowing microfiche screens all day. I unlocked the front door, expecting the quiet sanctuary of our apartment. Instead, I found the main hallway lined with heavy, stacked cardboard moving boxes. Panic spiking in my chest, I dropped my keys and walked quickly down the hall into the spare bedroom. The small, quiet room I had meticulously, lovingly converted into my personal study over the last 3 years. My extensive collection of framed antique Minnesota transit maps, my rare vintage globes, my carefully organized, heavily curated bookshelves, my reading chair. It was all completely gone, stripped bare. In its place sat a massive, sleek, aggressive standing desk made of dark walnut, dual ultra-wide monitors, and a high-backed leather executive chair. Julian walked into the room behind me, casually sipping a lime sparkling water. "Surprise," he said, his tone entirely lacking any actual warmth or enthusiasm. "Where are my things, Julian?" I asked, my voice trembling with shock. "Where are my maps?" "I needed a proper home office," he stated flatly, gesturing to the massive desk. "My late-night conference calls with the West Coast investors were keeping you awake when I worked from the dining table. I boxed your little map collection up safely. It's down in the basement storage unit." He had packed away my entire sanctuary without asking. He had relegated my life's passion to a damp, concrete basement to make physical room for his swelling ego. "You couldn't have discussed this with me?" I asked, fighting back the hot, stinging tears of violation. This was my study. I need a quiet place to work, too. You work at a public library, Linnea, he sighed, walking over to his new desk and proudly patting the cold plastic of the monitors. Do your dusty reading there. This is where the actual money is made. I'm running an empire from this room. You should be thanking me for being proactive in cleaning up all that useless clutter. Then came the institutional, legal threat, the precise moment he tried to legally trap me in a burning building. We were sitting on the living room couch, eating expensive takeout sushi. The room smelled of soy sauce, pickled ginger, and tension. He casually dropped the bomb, sandwiching it effortlessly between bites of a spicy tuna roll. My corporate lawyer drew up some paperwork today, he said casually, his eyes fixed on the television screen. What kind of paperwork? I asked, my chopsticks pausing in midair. A post-nuptial agreement, he said smoothly, pausing in midair. It's standard procedure, really. Standard procedure for who, Julian? We've been married for years. With the new venture capital investors coming on board for the massive commercial projects, their board of directors wants to ensure the business assets are strictly firewalled from any potential marital property disputes down the line. It's just corporate housekeeping. He reached into his leather briefcase beside the couch and slid a thick, heavy manila envelope onto my lap. It felt like a brick. Firewalled from me? I asked, staring at the envelope. It protects you, too, from any massive financial liability if the market crashes, he lied effortlessly. Just look it over and sign it by Friday. And if I want my own independent lawyer to read it, I asked. He scoffed, a short, ugly sound. Don't be dramatic, Linnea. Beatrice already reviewed every single page. She said it's completely ironclad and fair to both of us. Just sign the damn paper so I can get the funding released. I didn't open the envelope right away. I didn't need to. I knew exactly, precisely what it was. It was his meticulously planned exit strategy. He was actively preparing to leave me for Alara, but he wanted to ensure he could legally strip all the valuable copper wiring out of the walls of our marriage before he tossed the match and set the house on fire. But the cruelest moment, the agonizing, soul-crushing moment that permanently, irreversibly extinguished whatever tiny flickering ember of mercy or love I had left for him, happened 3 weeks later. My grandfather Elias passed away on a Tuesday morning in January. It was a violently cold day. The sky was pouring freezing sleet that coated the city in a treacherous layer of gray ice. I got the phone call from the night nurse at his assisted living facility at 6 a.m. I was devastated. The grief hit me like a physical blow to the sternum. I collapsed onto the edge of the bed, sobbing so hard I couldn't draw oxygen into my lungs. To the edge of the bed. My anchor, the only man who had ever truly understood my quiet nature, was gone. I needed to get to the facility in St. Paul immediately to handle his final arrangements and speak to the coroner. I wiped my face, pulled on my heavy winter coat, and ran to the small ceramic bowl by the front door where we always kept our keys. My car keys were gone. The silver ring with the library fob was missing. Julian had left the apartment for an early morning site visit at 5:30. I frantically checked the brass hook on the wall. Julian's heavy Audi keys were hanging there. He had taken my keys instead of his own. I grabbed my cell phone with trembling hands and called him. It rang twice and went straight to a generic voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I texted him, my thumb slipping on the glass screen. Emergency. Grandfather died. You took my keys. Please come back immediately. Nothing. No response. No read receipt. I was trapped. I had to order an Uber. Because of the severe ice storm, surge pricing was in effect, and there were barely any drivers on the road. I stood outside on the icy, wind-whipped sidewalk in the freezing rain for 22 agonizing minutes, waiting for a stranger's car to finally arrive. My fingers went completely numb. I arrived at the nursing home freezing, wet, and entirely alone. The facility smelled overwhelmingly of harsh antiseptic bleach, pureed peas, and old damp linen. I handled my grandfather's body, cried over his cold hands, signed the heavy stack of legal release forms for the coroner, and sat in that sterile, suffocating room alone for 4 solid hours. Julian finally called my phone at exactly noon. "Hey babe, just saw your frantic texts," he said. His voice was entirely too bright, too loud, too relaxed. "Julian, he's dead," I choked out, tears instantly welling up again. "He's gone." "I know. I saw the text. So sorry about your grandpa, babe. Truly. And I accidentally grabbed your keys in the dark this morning. Truly. Crazy morning." "I was standing in the freezing sleet for half an hour, Julian. I had to handle the coroner all by myself." "My phone died out at the construction site," he lied, his voice entirely devoid of actual empathy. "No chargers in the temporary trailer. Really sorry I wasn't there." I closed my eyes. Through the speaker of the phone, beneath the sound of his voice, I could hear the faint, unmistakable sound of smooth jazz music playing. I could hear the distinct, rhythmic clinking of heavy silver forks against fine china plates. I could hear the low murmur of a crowded dining room. He wasn't standing in a freezing construction trailer. He was sitting in an expensive, warm restaurant. "Where are you right now?" I asked, my voice suddenly completely dead, stripped of all emotion. "I told you, I'm out at the site in Edina," he lied smoothly, not missing a single beat. "I'll be home by 6 to comfort you." He came home at 6:30. When he leaned in to give me a hollow, obligatory hug, his wool coat smelled faintly, but distinctly, of heavy gardenias and expensive champagne. The final breaking point wasn't a massive explosion. It wasn't a screaming match. It was a quiet, profound internal click. The heavy metallic sound of an impenetrable vault door locking shut forever. It happened the very next day, the afternoon after my grandfather's small, quiet funeral. I was walking through the apartment, numbly emptying the small wastebaskets. I walked into Julian's pristine new home office to empty his trash can. Beneath a pile of crumpled yellow sticky notes, discarded bank envelopes, and empty disposable coffee cups, something shiny and metallic caught my eye. I reached my hand deep into the garbage and pulled it out. It was a 1920s solid brass bookmark, intricately etched with the vintage Minneapolis skyline. I had spent 3 grueling months tracking that specific rare piece of history down through a notoriously difficult antique dealer in Chicago. I had paid a small fortune for it, having it carefully restored and polished, to give to Julian as a gift for our first wedding anniversary. He had thrown it in the garbage. It wasn't an accident. It hadn't slipped off the desk. It was nested deeply beneath multiple layers of fresh trash. He had deliberately discarded it because it was old, because it was from me, and because it meant absolutely nothing to him. I stood there in the center of his aggressively modern stolen office, holding the slightly tarnished heavy piece of brass in my palm. I didn't cry. I didn't feel a single ounce of sadness. My heart rate didn't even elevate. Instead, I felt a sudden, terrifying, crystal-clear wave of absolute clarity wash over my entire body. The lingering fog of gaslighting, confusion, and desperate hope instantly evaporated, leaving behind only cold, hard, calculating logic, because I am an archivist. And when an archivist discovers that a vital historical record has been intentionally, maliciously destroyed, they do not give up, they do not cry, they start digging. Phase 5 of my life, the destruction phase, began right then, in the suffocating silence of that room. What nobody in the world, especially Julian, knew was that I had already begun my meticulous, silent investigation the very afternoon I saw him at the coffee shop with Alara. For 3 months, I had been quietly, obsessively building an impenetrable fortress of damning data while he was busy painting the walls of his fragile glass house. I took Grandfather Elias's advice to heart. I didn't check the heavy locks on the front door. I didn't try to guess Julian's new encrypted iPad passcode. I didn't try to hack into his work email. I didn't hire a sleazy private investigator to tail his car. I went straight through the basement window. I used my professional, unparalleled access. Down in the subterranean levels of the Hennepin County Library, sitting at my secure terminal bathed in the blue light of the monitors, I have high-level, unrestricted government clearance. I have direct access to municipal databases, state tax records, unredacted property deeds, and corporate registry files that the general public has to pay exorbitant legal fees and wait months to request. I started by running a massive, sweeping Boolean search on the first name Ilara. I cross-referenced that single data point with all recent residential property purchases, commercial leases, and utility activations in the wealthy Adena zip code, where Julian constantly claimed his endless construction site was located. It took me 4 solid days of meticulous, eye-straining filtering through thousands of rows of raw data, but I finally found her. Ilara Vance, a 34-year-old freelance interior designer with a mediocre portfolio and a history of maxed-out credit cards. But finding her name was just the beginning of the thread. I dug aggressively into the specific property she had recently activated utilities for. It was a massive, newly constructed luxury townhouse situated on a private gated cul-de-sac in Adena. The recorded purchase price was a staggering $890,000. I pulled the unredacted digital copy of the property deed. Ilara Vance wasn't the only name listed on the title. The luxury property was legally co-owned by a corporate entity called Apex Holdings LLC. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard. I pulled the state registry filings for Apex Holdings LLC. The registered agent on file was a faceless shell corporation based out of Delaware, a classic maneuver to hide ownership. But the designated mailing address for the county tax assessments wasn't in Delaware. It was a specific P.O. box located in downtown Minneapolis. I instantly recognized the P.O. box number. I had seen it printed on a stack of Julian's business mail sitting on his desk 3 months prior. My husband had bought a luxury house with his mistress, but I needed to know exactly where the capital came from. That's when my perfectly trained memory recalled the color-coded spreadsheet Julian had aggressively shoved in my face, the consolidation of our accounts. I dug deep into the financial property records, utilizing a massive professional favor from a close friend who worked as a senior forensic accountant for the State Department of Revenue. We spent a week tracking the convoluted, intentionally muddy wire transfers. Julian hadn't just moved our money. He had siphoned exactly $267,300 completely out of our joint home equity line of credit. He had funneled that massive sum through 2 separate dummy intermediary accounts to wash the origin before finally dumping it directly into the Apex Holdings LLC bank account to serve as the massive cash down payment for Ilara's Adena townhouse. But the truly spectacular part, the specific piece of metadata that made me smile a cold, humorless, terrifying smile in the pitch-dark silence of the archives. To legally withdraw a sum of that magnitude from a joint HELOC, the bank absolutely required both account holders' signatures on a physical authorization form. My signature was clearly printed on the bottom of the scanned digital document. I had never seen that document in my life. I had never signed it. I zoomed in on the high-resolution digital copy of the authorization form. My signature had been expertly, flawlessly forged. It looked exactly like my handwriting. But a forged signature on a legally binding financial document of that magnitude requires a licensed notary public to physically witness the signing and legally verify the identities of the signatories with a state-issued stamp. I scrolled down to the very bottom right corner of the page. The circular blue ink notary stamp was crystal clear. The registered notary name printed inside the circle was Beatrice Caldwell, his sister. Beatrice had knowingly, maliciously and illegally notarized a forged financial document to help her brother steal $250,000 of my own equity to buy a luxury house for his blonde mistress. I had them both. I had the smoking gun. But my archivist brain knew the realities of the legal system. I knew that in a standard divorce proceeding, complex financial documents can be tied up in brutal, expensive litigation for years. Expensive corporate lawyers can argue clerical errors, verbal authorizations, misunderstandings, or claim I signed it and simply forgot. I didn't just want my money back. I wanted Julian's complete, utter, inescapable public destruction. I needed undeniable behavioral, audio-visual proof of his malicious intent. I needed him on the permanent historical record, actively admitting to the felony. So I turned to my most protected asset, my brain. I drove to a highly specialized surveillance electronics store hidden in a strip mall in St. Louis Park. The store smelled of ozone, hot solder, and cheap plastic. I paid cash for 3 4K resolution, motion-activated, audio-enabled micro cameras. They were the exact size of a silver dime, equipped with advanced low-light sensors and internal battery lives that lasted up to 30 days on standby. I brought them home in my purse. When Julian left for the gym, I went straight down to the damp concrete basement storage unit. I unpacked my boxed-up library collection until I found a heavy, pristine set of vintage encyclopedias from 1954. The pages smelled of old dust and history. I selected volume 14, M to N. Sitting at the basement workbench using a razor-sharp X-Acto knife and a metal ruler, I spent 6 painstaking silent hours hollowing out the thick pages, creating a perfect hidden rectangular cavity. The thick pages. I carefully drilled a microscopic, invisible hole directly through the thick leather spine, right in the dead center of the gold leaf letter N. I mounted the tiny camera inside the cavity, securing it perfectly with black electrical tape, and wirelessly tested the field of view on my phone. It was flawless. The lens was completely invisible to the naked eye. The next afternoon, while Julian was sitting at his massive walnut desk, I casually walked into his new home office, carrying the heavy encyclopedia. "What is that dusty thing?" he asked, looking up from his monitors with a scowl. "Just adding some decor to your shelves," I told him, sliding the book perfectly onto the eye-level shelf directly across from his desk, ensuring the spine faced him. "Thought a vintage book would make you look more intellectual and established on your Zoom calls with the investors." He laughed, a smug, deeply satisfied, arrogant sound. "See? You're finally adapting to the real world, Lynn. It looks great. Just don't clutter up the desk with any more of your junk." "I won't," I smiled sweetly. He had absolutely no idea he was staring directly down the barrel of a high-definition, motion-activated lens. For the next 3 excruciating weeks, I played the demanding role of the submissive, oblivious, defeated wife to absolute perfection. I woke up early and made his coffee. I quietly washed his clothes. I listened patiently to his endless, elaborate lies about late nights at the office and stressful contractor delays. And every 3 days, at exactly 3:14 in the morning, while Julian was dead asleep in our bed, his chest rising and falling in deep REM sleep, I would silently slip out from under the covers, creep down the hall into his office, carefully slide the encyclopedia off the shelf, swap the microscopic SD card, and download the massive video files onto a secure, heavily encrypted external hard drive. Most of the footage was incredibly boring. Julian pacing the floor on phone calls, Julian yelling at terrified contractors, Julian aggressively picking his teeth while staring at spreadsheets. But on a rainy Thursday afternoon, while I was sitting at my secure terminal in the library archives, my headphones tightly over my ears, I hit the absolute jackpot. I was watching the footage recorded from the previous afternoon. Julian was sitting back in his expensive leather executive chair, and Alara was sitting aggressively on his lap. Her arms were wrapped tightly around his neck. She was wearing the camel coat. They were kissing deeply, the microphone picking up the wet, sickening sound of it. "When is she finally moving out?" Alara whined, pulling back and tracing his jawline with a sharp, red manicured fingernail. "I'm so incredibly tired of sneaking around like a teenager. The Adina house is completely ready. We have the new furniture delivered. Just serve her the damn divorce papers, Julian." Julian sighed heavily, leaning back in his chair and resting his hands on her hips. "I know, baby, I know," he said soothingly. "I just have to make absolutely sure the post-nup agreement is ironclad before I drop the bomb on her. If Linnea finds out about the $267,000 I pulled from the equity line, she'll panic and try to freeze all the bank accounts." "Why is it taking so long? She's just a librarian. But she doesn't know, right?" Ilara asked, her voice laced with sudden anxiety. Julian laughed, a cruel, echoing, deeply arrogant sound that bounced off the walls of the room he had stolen from me. "Linnea? God, no. She's completely clueless. She's basically sleepwalking. She thinks I just consolidated our savings for a commercial loan. She has absolutely no idea Beatrice stamped the forged signature on the HELOC withdrawal form. Beatrice covered our tracks perfectly. By the time my boring little librarian wife figures out she's totally broke, we'll be legally married and drinking champagne in Adina." I paused the video. I sat in the silent, temperature-controlled, perfectly sterile archive room. My heart wasn't racing. My hands weren't shaking. I wasn't crying. I felt absolutely nothing but cold, absolute surgical precision. The metadata was complete. The historical record was sealed. I exported the high-definition video file. I saved it to 3 different encrypted flash drives. I printed the forged, notarized HELOC authorization document. I printed the unredacted state deed to the Edina townhouse. I printed the forensic accounting trace of the wire transfers. I printed the Sephora receipt. Then I picked up my phone and called Ms. Albright. Ms. Catherine Albright was a senior, named partner at the most ruthless, terrifying, and expensive family law firm in Minneapolis. I hadn't just Googled her. I had vetted her deeply through public court records, specifically searching for lawyers who had a proven, documented history of aggressively destroying hidden asset defenses in high net worth divorces. She didn't do gentle collaborative mediations. She did scorched earth, heavily weaponized litigation. I walked into her plush, leather-scented corner office, placed a massive, meticulously tabbed 4-inch binder on her heavy oak desk, and handed her the silver iPad. "I want everything," I said quietly, sitting down in the leather guest chair. "This is highly irregular, Mrs. Caldwell," Ms. Albright said, raising a perfectly arched eyebrow. "Most wives in your position just want a fair split and to move on." "I don't want fair," I replied, my voice dead flat. "I want his complete and total ruin." Ms. Albright adjusted her heavy tortoiseshell glasses. She opened the binder. She reviewed the forged documents, the wire transfers, and the property deeds for 20 minutes in total. Heavy silence. The only sound in the room was the ticking of her antique grandfather clock. Then she pressed play on the iPad and watched the video. When she finally looked up at me, she had a terrifying, brilliant, predatory smile on her face. "Mrs. Caldwell," Ms. Albright said softly, closing the binder with a satisfying thud, "I believe we are going to completely ruin this man's life." "How quickly can we execute?" I asked. "We let him serve you first," she smiled. "We let him think he's won the war. Then we detonate." The reversal happened exactly 14 days later. Julian had finally proudly served me with official divorce papers, citing irreconcilable differences and aggressively demanding I sign the enclosed post-nuptial agreement that would leave me with virtually nothing but my own modest state pension. I played the part of the devastated wife perfectly. I cried, I begged, and then I reluctantly agreed to meet him for a preliminary mediation session to discuss the final division of assets. The setting was a freezing cold, heavily air-conditioned, glass-walled conference room in a towering high-rise building in downtown Minneapolis. It was 9:15 in the morning. The sky outside the floor-to-ceiling windows was a heavy, oppressive slate gray. Julian was already sitting at the head of the long, polished mahogany table when I walked in. He was at absolute peak smugness. He was wearing his favorite bespoke navy suit, a heavy gold watch glinting aggressively on his wrist beneath the recessed lighting. He smelled strongly of Tom Ford cologne. His corporate lawyer, a tired, graying, defeated-looking man named Davis, sat silently beside him, organizing a stack of papers, and sitting arrogantly on the plush leather sofa in the far corner of the room, casually scrolling on her iPhone, was Beatrice. She was officially there acting as his financial advisor. I walked into the room closely followed by Miss Albright. I was wearing a simple, elegant, stark black dress. Miss Albright. I sat down directly across from Julian, folded my hands neatly on the cold wood table, and looked him directly in the eyes. He offered me a sickeningly sweet, deeply pitying smile. "Linnea," Julian said, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Let's make this quick and painless for both of us. I really don't want to fight you in court. If you just sign the post-nup agreement today, I'm willing to be generous. I'll offer you a $50,000 lump sum settlement." "50,000?" I repeated softly. "It's more than fair," he insisted, leaning forward confidentially. "Considering I generated all the actual wealth in this marriage, it'll help you get a nice little apartment and get on your feet." Ms. Albright didn't even bother to open her expensive leather briefcase. She simply placed a single, perfectly smooth, unmarked manila folder perfectly in the dead center of the mahogany table. "Mr. Caldwell," Ms. Albright said, her voice dripping with lethal professional venom, "my client formally rejects your insulting offer. We are instead demanding full, unencumbered ownership of the primary marital home, the absolute entirety of your primary investment portfolio, and the immediate legal liquidation and transfer of the property located at 414 Sycamore Lane in Edina." Julian froze. His smug, pitying smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of profound, staggering confusion. Beatrice stopped scrolling on her phone. Her head snapped up. She slowly stood up from the leather sofa. "Are you completely insane?" Julian scoffed, letting out a harsh bark of laughter, leaning aggressively forward over the table. "You have absolutely no legal claim to the Edina property. That townhouse is owned by an independent corporate LLC. It has absolutely nothing to do with our marital assets." "Actually," Ms. Albright said smoothly, reaching into her bag and sliding the silver iPad onto the table, "it has everything to do with marital assets." Specifically, it has to do with the $267,300 you illegally and maliciously siphoned from the joint HELOC account to fund it. "I have a legally signed authorization form for that withdrawal," Julian snapped, his voice suddenly rising in high-pitched panic. "Linnea signed it. The bank cleared it." "Oh, Julian," I said softly. It was the very first time I had spoken directly to him since entering the room. "I didn't sign it." I reached out and calmly tapped the glass screen of the iPad. The volume was turned all the way up to maximum. The video began to play. The crisp, flawless 4K footage from the hollowed-out 1954 encyclopedia filled the silent, tense conference room. There was Julian's face on the bright screen. There was Ilara sitting on his lap wearing the camel coat. And then the crystal-clear audio echoed violently off the cold glass walls. "Linnea, God, no. She's completely clueless. She has absolutely no idea Beatrice stamped the forged signature on the HELOC withdrawal form. Beatrice covered our tracks perfectly." The physical reaction in the room was intensely cinematic. I watched it happen in beautiful, agonizing slow motion. The color instantly drained from Julian's face so fast he looked physically translucent, like a corpse. His mouth fell open, his jaw unhinging, but no sound came out. A thick bead of terrified sweat instantly materialized on his left temple, catching the overhead light. His large hands, resting flat on the mahogany table, began to tremble so violently that his gold watch audibly rattled against the wood. His lawyer Davis stared blankly at the iPad screen for a long, horrifying moment, and then slowly, mechanically turned his head to look at Julian with an expression of sheer, unadulterated professional horror. But the absolute best reaction belonged to Beatrice. Horror. She let out a sharp, strangled gasp, physically stumbling backward away from the table until her sharp shoulder blades hit the heavy glass wall behind her. She began to hyperventilate, her chest heaving. She knew exactly, precisely what that specific video meant. It wasn't just embarrassing proof of infidelity, it was a recorded, undeniable confession to felony mortgage fraud, and it implicated her directly, destroying her entire legal and financial career in a matter of seconds. Where, where did you get that? Julian whispered. His voice cracked, sounding like a terrified child. His eyes darted frantically, wildly around the room. You bugged my home office? That's illegal. You can't use that in court. Minnesota is a one-party consent state for audio and video recording, Mr. Caldwell, Ms. Albright said cheerfully, clasping her hands together. The recording is perfectly legal, but more importantly, this isn't just leverage for a civil divorce settlement. It is direct, undeniable evidence of a state and federal felony. You're bluffing, Julian choked out, pulling at his expensive silk tie as if he were suddenly suffocating. You won't go to the DA. Try me, Mr. Caldwell, Miss Albright smiled her terrifying smile. If you do not sign our proposed settlement agreement within the next 60 seconds, relinquishing all assets, I am walking this iPad, along with the physical forged deed and the certified forensic accounting trail, directly across the street to the Hennepin County District Attorney's Office. They love open and shut fraud cases. Julian whipped his head around to look at Beatrice, desperate for his architect to save him. Beatrice, do something, he pleaded. Shut up, Julian, Beatrice hissed, her eyes wide with absolute terror staring at the floor. Her breathing was shallow and panicked. She was entirely consumed with calculating the exact trajectory of her own impending ruin. Julian, his lawyer Davis hissed, grabbing Julian roughly by the arm and shoving a pen into his trembling hand. Sign the paper, right now. Sign it before she ruins you. Julian's hand shook so violently he could barely hold the heavy gold pen. He didn't read the documents, he just signed them. He signed over the downtown apartment. He signed over the massive investment portfolios. He signed over the Adena property. He signed away an entire decade of his life, his wealth, and his arrogance in less than 60 seconds. When he was finally done, he threw the pen onto the mahogany table. It clattered loudly in the silence. He looked up at me, his eyes wide, bloodshot, and hollow. He was completely, utterly stripped of his armor. You planned this, he breathed, his voice shaking. You set me up. I slowly stood up from the leather chair. I calmly buttoned my black wool coat. I picked up my purse, slinging it over my shoulder, and looked down at the pathetic, broken man who had arrogantly tried to erase my entire existence. The archives never forget, Julian, I said quietly, my voice perfectly steady, and neither do I. I turned and walked out of the glass room. I didn't look back. Absolute power is found in total restraint, and I had already used all the ammunition I needed. The aftermath of that morning was a spectacular, cascading, uncontrollable collapse. Within 2 weeks, the divorce was legally finalized by a very eager judge. I took immediate ownership of absolutely everything. Because I possessed the undeniable evidence of the forged HELOC signature, the bank immediately froze all of Julian's remaining commercial business accounts pending a massive internal corporate fraud investigation. Without any access to his capital or his credit lines, his massive commercial real estate deals evaporated overnight. His wealthy venture capital investors pulled out immediately, citing strict morality and fraud clauses hidden deep in their contracts. Within a month, the harsh, unforgiving reality of the situation finally hit Elira. When she realized Julian was completely, legally broke and that the luxury Adena townhouse was being aggressively seized and liquidated by me to repay the stolen funds, she meticulously packed her designer bags. She didn't even say goodbye in person. She left him a terse 2-sentence text message and immediately moved to Chicago to find a new host. But the heaviest, most devastating consequence fell exactly where it belonged. On Beatrice. I didn't even need to formally report her to the district attorney to ruin her life. I simply dropped a manila envelope in the mail. It contained a high-resolution copy of the forged, notarized document, along with a printed, certified transcript of Julian's video confession. I mailed it directly to the senior compliance officer at her elite Edina wealth management firm. She was violently fired within 48 hours. Escorted out of her office by corporate security, the state immediately and permanently revoked her notary license. To protect their own reputation, her former firm filed a massive preemptive civil lawsuit against her to legally distance themselves from her fraudulent actions. She went from making a massive, arrogant 6-figure salary to being completely, permanently unhireable in the entire financial sector. She currently works as a tired shift manager at a mid-tier, depressing retail clothing store in a dying suburban mall. Julian tried to contact me exactly one last time. It was exactly 2 months after the mediation. My phone buzzed on my nightstand at 2:14 in the morning. I didn't answer it. I let it ring into the dark. He left a rambling voicemail. When I woke up the next morning, I listened to it while making my tea. His voice was thick, heavily slurred with cheap alcohol, and entirely, pathetically broken. Linnea, please, he sobbed wetly into the phone receiver, the sound of passing highway traffic roaring in the background. I have absolutely nothing left. I'm living in a weekly motel in Bloomington. Elira is gone. Beatrice won't even answer my calls. I'm so sorry. I was so stupid. Please, Linnea, just talk to me. Please. I listened to the pathetic message exactly once. I didn't feel a massive, overwhelming surge of triumphant victory. I didn't feel a shred of pity or sadness. I just felt a profound, quiet, beautiful emptiness that slowly began to fill with the warm, golden light of absolute closure. I deleted the voicemail, permanently blocked his phone number, and deleted his contact file. My new life is much smaller now, but it is entirely, fiercely mine. I sold the massive downtown marital apartment and used the funds to buy a beautiful, sunlit 2-bedroom apartment in the quiet, artsy neighborhood of Northeast Minneapolis. The walls are painted a warm, soothing cream color. The hardwood floors don't echo with heavy footsteps. My antique Minnesota transit maps are framed in dark oak and hung perfectly, mathematically straight in the living room. I still work down in the library archives. I still breathe in the scent of old paper and vanilla. I still eat cold sesame noodles straight out of the cardboard takeout carton at 2 in the morning when I can't sleep. My grandfather Elias was absolutely right. A liar only checks the heavy brass locks on the front door. They are so deeply, aggressively consumed with protecting their own fragile illusions, so obsessed with their own arrogant reflection, that they completely forget to look at the quiet people standing right beside them. They forget that sometimes the quietest, most invisible people in the room are the ones taking the most detailed, meticulous notes. Every single morning, I wake up in my new sunlit apartment. I make myself a hot, perfectly steeped cup of sweet chamomile tea. I stand by the large bay window, feeling the warmth of the ceramic mug against my palms, and I watch the city slowly wake up beneath the frost. I don't check my phone for lies. I don't listen with a knot in my stomach for the sound of a heavy key turning in the door. I am completely, finally, untouchably safe, and I didn't even have to change the locks.